Hello, welcome to Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation tutorial series. In this particular video, we will talk about primary key. Why primary key is important to understand. So when you will create the index for a particular table, that time you should have the understanding of the primary index. So to understand the primary index, you should have the understanding of the primary key. That's why we need to understand the primary key. So let's try to understand what is primary key first. As you can see in this picture, this is nothing but a table, and you already know that these are vertical things are called columns in the concept of SQL server or structured query language, or in the concept of Dynamics 365 Financial Operation, we call it as a field. And each field is nothing but a column in a table, and a particular row or the horizontal cell that you are watching here, that you would see here, that is actually nothing but a entity in a record or one particular row, that is also called a record set, record inside a table. So there one question may arise that if I want to uniquely identify a particular row, this particular row, so what is the process that we need to follow? So to uniquely identify a particular row inside a table, we have a primary key. A key means a column that will uniquely identify one particular row. That column is called a primary key. Maybe one single column can uniquely identify a particular row. For example, for each and every person, the email ID should be unique. So if the column will be the email ID, and if you will able to identify uniquely record by this email ID, then that email ID column can be a unique key or the primary key. Also, the social security number of a person can be a unique column. Also, the Aadhaar card ID will be the unique key column of a table. So if in a table there is that is not possible to uniquely identify with one column, then we can combine more than one column to identify a unique record inside a table. So this way we can say that if we are using more than one column to uniquely identify, that can be a composite key. Okay, so let's try to understand theoretically one by one the points which is required for primary key. So here I'll discuss few points. You can take the note for your interview, or for the learning purpose also you can take this note. The first point is saying that a table is typically has a one or combination of columns, has a column or one column, a column or a combination of column that contain values that uniquely identify each row in a table. This column or columns is called actually primary key. If one particular column will identify unique record, then that particular column will be a primary key. And if a combination of column will be able to uniquely identify each row in the table, then those columns are actually called the primary key. Now we will show this point with an example. As you can see in this table, that we have an employee table, okay, and it has some column like employee ID, Aadhaar number, EMP name, job, salary, department ID. So you can see here the employee ID is unique for each and every column. So that's why you can say that employee ID is a this will be able to uniquely identify each record in this table. So employee ID can be a primary key of this particular employee table. Okay, now you can see in this table, this is a product vendor table. Here you can see the product ID Also you can see the vendor ID, but this product ID table, product ID column will not be able to uniquely identify each record, because you can see this two value is not unique in this table. So that's why product ID will not be able to uniquely identify. In case of here, you can see here is our vendor ID, and you can see also here 10447 but you can see that this is a unique, but if I'll change it to 724, then this ID, vendor ID, will not be able to uniquely identify all the records which is present in this table, because this 4 here is not unique. But if you'll combine these two particular product ID or vendor ID, you can create a composite key to identify the records. So we can say that with these two particular column, product ID or vendor ID, with the combination of these two columns, we can create a primary key, and that primary key will be able to identify each and every record inside this particular table. Okay, now I think it's clear. Now we will move to the next point. When you specify a primary key constraint for a table, the database engine enforces the data uniqueness. Uniqueness means your record will not be copied. Okay, or when you will try to insert same email ID in two different row, it will throw an error, because it will enforce the data uniqueness by automatically. Also you can see that when you create a primary key constraints, the database engine enforces the data uniqueness by automatically creating an unique index for the primary key column. This index also permits the faster access of data and when the primary key is used in the query. So if we'll create the primary key, this is the benefits of primary key, that in case of Dynamics 365, if we'll create the primary key, the primary index will be created based on the primary key, and if we'll create the index, it will permits the faster access of data. So when you will select a query in where clause, you will be able to access the data in faster manner. Now we'll move to the next point, that is the primary key usually type of key that other tables call the child table refer to when a foreign key field in those other tables need a relational identifier. So let me give an example, then this point will be clear for you. As you can see in this table, we have two table, actually employee table, and here you can see the department table. So in this table, the primary key is the employee ID, and also in this table the department ID is unique, or this is the primary key. Okay, but when there will be a relationship between these two tables, then we can create one column called employee department ID, and a department ID will be the foreign key for this employee table, but this will be the same as this one. But in this table, here in this employee table, this employee ID may not be unique, but in this particular table the department ID will be unique. So in this table, this primary key is nothing but, this department number is nothing but a primary key for this particular department table, but this department number here in this table will be the foreign key. Okay, so that's the important point. If there will be a foreign key relationship, then this primary key will be treated as the foreign key in this employee table. I hope now this point is clear. So let me read this point one more time. The primary key is usually the type of key that other table is called the child table, referred to when a foreign key field in those other table need a relational identifier. Okay, now we'll move to the next slide and we'll see some important points about primary key. The first point is saying that the table can contain only one primary key. Okay, so one table only contain one primary key. More than one primary key cannot be contained. For example, in your table, employee table, you can see this employee ID is unique. If there will be Aadhaar number, in case of India, you know that for each and every person the Aadhaar number is different. So this can also be a primary key. Maybe you can use this employee ID as a primary key, or you can use the Aadhaar number as a primary key. So based on your requirement and faster retrieval of your data, you can make the primary key. But remember that for this employee table, the primary key only be one, and all other key will be the alternative key. In later point of time, you can change your primary key from employee ID to the Aadhaar number based on your requirement. But remember that for one particular table, the primary key will be one. Now we'll move to the second point, that a primary key cannot exceed 60 columns. A primary key cannot exceed 16 columns, and total key length will be the 900 bytes. Okay. One more important point here, the index guaranteed by a primary key constraint cannot cause the number of index on the table to exceed 999 cluster index and 999 non-cluster index, and 1 is cluster index. So we'll talk about cluster index in later point of video. But remember that cluster index defines the physical structure of the database, and for a particular one table there should be one cluster index, and all other index you can create, but that will not be the physical structure. You can compare it as the in our books we find that the index in the first or second page, that index you can refer as a cluster index, and at the end of the book you will find a type of index you can refer, that will be like a non-cluster index. Now we'll move to the third point, if clustered or non-clustered is not specified for a primary key constant, cluster is used if there is no cluster index on the table. So if you will not specify a primary key constraint in a table, then cluster is used if there is no cluster index on the table is there. Okay, and already know that if you will, for a new particular table, if there will be no cluster index, then system will generate one cluster index, and based on that will be based on a rec ID of that particular table. So it will create a cluster index based on the rec ID, or also we can say it as a surrogate key. Now in the last point, you can see that all columns defined within a primary key constant must be defined as null. So if you are specifying a primary key, that should not be null. So it will be defined as a not null, and if nullability is not specified, all column participating in a primary key constant have their nullability set to not null. Okay, this is very much important. It should not be null if you are setting it as a primary key. Now we'll move to one important point for a primary key index for a new table. So in case of 2000X 2012 version, as well as in D365 financial operation, the primary key for every new table is always enforced by an index. Okay, and that has exactly one field, and the field is usually an incremented number. Okay, so each time it will change its value, or it will be a incremented value, or a completely meaningless number. As you know that if you already seen the rec ID for a table, that is nothing but a incremented value or combination of meaningless value that is generated by the system. Okay, for new table, the default is the primary key based on the rec id field, and this is represented as the surrogate key in the user interface. Okay, so if you already saw our previous videos of the table, there I have already shown that primary index there and how the surrogate key actually implementing the cluster index. And in this slide you can see that there is a table called customer table, cast table, and there is an index account IDX, and you can see one field is there, account number. So this account number is nothing but a primary index for this particular cast table, because if you'll open the property of this particular index, you will be able to see that there is mentioned one property, allow duplicate, and you can see that allow duplicate no. That means your value for this account number in this table will not be duplicated, so it will not allow the duplicate elements. Okay, that's why this particular account number is nothing but a primary key or primary field for this cast table. And this allow duplicate property must be set to no, because if you set to yes, your data will be not unique, but if you set to no, then your data will be unique. And you can see in this picture or in screenshot that if we have few fields in our table like employee designation, employee gender, employee ID, employee name, employee salary, but here you can see that 3 or 4 different types of fields are there which is auto generated by the system. So data area ID also generated, reg person also generated, also partition also generated, and you can see at the last it containing the rec ID. So this is nothing but system generated or random meaningless integer value, and if you will not create any index or if you will not set to any primary key, then this rec ID will be your surrogate key, and that surrogate key will be used in your table. And you can say that it will be the primary key of your table if you will not generate your primary key in your table. So if you will create primary key explicitly, then that will be your primary key. But in case of new table, if in that table yet no primary key is set or no cluster index or primary index is not set, then rec ID will be your primary index. Using this primary key column, your primary index will be generated. Okay, I hope now it's clear. As you can see in this slide that we have a employee table, and in this table if you'll right click and see the property section, in the primary index you can see there is a surrogate key. We can say that behind the surrogate key the rec ID is present, but you from the system end you will not be able to see. You only, if you will click on the drop down, you will be able to see only this drop down, and by default this will be selected, and this is nothing but a surrogate key. Also in cluster index also you will be able to see the surrogate key, but if you want to change this from this surrogate to key to any other key, then you have to create the index. Okay, and once you will create the index, and if it will be a primary index, then you have to select the allow duplicate properties to no, then you will be able to see that particular key in this section. That means in this drop down, from this primary index drop down, you can select that particular key, because that one is there is the property set to allow duplicate no. That's why you will be able to select that particular index here, because that will be available or that will be applicable for the primary key. And if that will be not a primary key index, then you will be able to select from the cluster index. Also it is always best practice, if you have the primary index, then select that particular index in your cluster index, because for one particular table the cluster index will be 1 and all other index that you will create, those are the non-cluster index, because we already know that for a particular table only one cluster index will be there and 999 will be the non-cluster index. Okay, I hope now it's clear. As in this example, you can see for the cast table, in the primary index there is surrogate key. Also in the index section we have a IDX, account IDX, which is the primary key. I already shown in previous that there was a allow duplicate no, so that's why you can see the account IDX here. Also party ID also unique, that's why you can select the account IDX as a primary key. And you can see that in both case, cluster index and the primary index, the account IDX selected, because this will form the cluster index to search the result in a better way or a faster way. And this also this index also create the physical structure for your table. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you understood the concept of primary key. So see you in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye.